Chapter 4. Sarita resented the fact that her in-laws had so much money but refused to even hire a cook. She was young at the time of her marriage, an arranged one, and had Rahul after their first anniversary. The in-laws were overjoyed, but she soon realized they didn't give her anything in return. They didn't even do any catering for the Godh Bharai when the entire family came over to give her presents. She had to order pizzas and her father paid for it. Her parents-in-law had taken everything she received at her wedding and kept it with them in the family locker. She was not allowed to wear any of the jewelry, even those gifted to her by her side of the family. And not wanting to spend on a nanny to look after the child, they had allowed her to go to her mother's house in Bhilai as soon as the gold was kept away. She had her delivery there and came back after 3 months. For her second child's birth, her mother trained a maid and paid her in advance to stay with Sarita and help with the baby. Even then, Sarita's in-laws grumbled that they were feeding a new member while staying awake the whole night because of a newborn's crying. Sarita complained to her husband Jay, but he refused to take sides, saying it was her own battle to fight. He occasionally took his children to the mall, giving Sarita some time to herself. But even for this, her in-laws begrudged her, saying their son was spending money eating outside when the maid could cook something for the children at home. Sarita couldn't figure it out. The family had properties in several parts of Mumbai, and yet they behaved as if they didn't have money. They were extremely stingy. Their immovable assets were valued at crores of rupees. But they insisted she cook all the meals at home. Even if they went for a film occasionally, they would either come back after the film and have their meal or eat before they left. They would not spend on popcorn and Coca-Cola. So in the early years of her marriage, she was a glorified maid, even sweeping the floors and doing the dishes. They told her that since she wasn't doing anything at home, she might as well do some work. But over the years, her health deteriorated, and Jay eventually agreed to keep a maid to clean up. A cook was more expensive, however, and so one was never hired. How she wished she could work like Aarti and spend some of her income on paying for a cook. The maid her mother had given in the early years was a huge boon to Sarita. But as soon as Ria turned 3, they'd sent her packing, saying Sarita could manage things on her own. And now, 10 years later, Sarita still hated the fact that she couldn't keep her own maid. And she hated it even more that she didn't have the courage to speak out about it. "Where did Ria get a mango from?" asked her mother-in-law as soon as Sarita walked in. "I bought a dozen today." Sarita walked to the sink to wash her hands to prepare for dinner. Her mother-in-law suddenly raised her voice. "There's no need to bring such expensive fruit at home. Kids will grow in any case. Bring bananas." Sarita sighed and quickly changed her statement so she wouldn't have to hear more about it. "I meant I brought it from my Mamaji's house. He gave me the mangoes for free." "Then it's okay," said the father-in-law, who was sitting in front of the TV. "Cut some for us also, Sarita." She looked at both of them and wondered how such literate people could be so mean. She glanced at her husband Jay, who didn't say a word and was engrossed in watching Kaun Banega Crorepati. He'd come home early today, a fact that her mother-in-law made sure to remark on in order to make her feel bad. Husband has come home and wife is still out for a walk. Sarita didn't say anything, but shot Jay a look that said he would hear about it later. She was quite the firebrand when it came to letting him know exactly how she felt, even though she kept her silence in front of his parents. He in turn would pacify her by pressing her feet or giving her a back massage. And since he had such lovely, soft hands, he gave the most amazing massages that soothed Sarita's body from head to toe. He was happy because he didn't have to spend any money on her, and she was happy because he pampered her. "Let her be. She needs to exercise," said Jay teasingly, aloud. And even though he meant it as a compliment, Sarita felt slighted. She decided not to have any sweets from that day forward. A vow she would break the very next day. "Where's Rahul?" asked Sarita. Jay got up from his chair in the drawing room and headed towards the bathroom, without answering Sarita. She looked around at everyone, and no one seemed to have a clue, or one bothered to find out while glued to the television. She took out her phone and walked to the kitchen where she began preparing the parathas. Rahul hung up on her and sent her a WhatsApp message instead. Since he had bought himself a phone 2 years ago, Rahul had been perpetually sending his mother messages instead of talking. But Sarita hadn't figured out how to message back. She only knew how to receive messages and make phone calls. She realized she was technologically challenged, but she hardly cared. His message said he was with his girlfriend and would be home after dinner. She frowned. Her boy, about to turn 19, was already dating? But she knew that if she tried to stop it, he would rebel and do things behind her back. So she let him go out with girls and drink, as long as he told her about it. She was aware that adolescents liked to do everything with alcohol. Otherwise, it wasn't fun. She recalled mentioning to her friends that she was an open-minded mother. They had berated her for it. How can you do that, Sarita? Geeta was completely shocked. I would never let my children drink till they're 21, Natasha had said, even though she had caught Diya sneaking a bottle from the bar to her room. And girlfriends should not be allowed, Aarti said. You need to put your foot down. What he needs to be doing is focusing on school. Our children can't be distracted at such a young age. Don't be a friend to them, be a parent. Sarita wondered if all her friends were really such strict disciplinarians with their own children. As for her, she had given Rahul and Riya complete freedom, and so far, they had not disappointed her. They did fairly well in school and were well-behaved children, unlike Aarti's child Aryan, for example, who was turning out to be quite a brat. He spoke rudely to his grandparents, and Sarita wondered, as she made her parathas, if she should mention it to Aarti, who was rarely around to see how her child was growing up. It just went to show how a working mother indulged her child all the time, and a stay-at-home mom found time for her kids. But Sarita would never tell Aarti. Everyone had their own parenting style, and it was an extremely sensitive topic between women. She didn't want to wedge a gap in their friendship by telling Aarti she had to find a different way to bring up her naughty boy. Sarita served dinner to her in-laws first, then her husband and Riya, and finally sat down with her own plate once everyone was done. The entire family had eyes on the TV while they ate, their daily dinner ritual. Sarita tried to make conversation between the same ads that came every time for the 2 hours they remained glued to the TV. Jay, why don't you ask Riya about what the teacher said today? Jay looked up from the TV and raised an eyebrow at Riya, who made a face at her mother. Ma, not now. Riya was not pleased at all with her mother. Sarita spoke in between mouthfuls of aloo parathas. Her teacher said she was a very bright student, but she was always distracted. Well, obviously, if she watches TV while doing her homework, she will be distracted, said Jay, chiding his daughter who wasn't in the mood to chat with her parents at all. She couldn't believe that they gave so much liberty to her brother and was so strict with her. She wasn't a baby anymore and needed some independence. She'd been begging them for a mobile phone, and her grandparents had refused to buy her one. Even her father, who took them all out for a movie once a month and had dinner at the food court in the mall, said it was too expensive to give her a mobile and pay for the monthly bills. And she'd wanted a Samsung, the latest model, because all her friends had one. She felt completely out of place among her peers, and she blamed her parents for it. But she dare not say anything, or she would get the thrashing of her life from her father, who had once slapped Rahul in front of the entire family for saying the F word in the house. Apparently, she's a computer genius, Sarita said. Will you get me a laptop then? Riya asked, and Jay laughed out loud. He gave his daughter a gentle pat on the back. I suggest you study maths and get an MBA. Your father doesn't make enough money to buy laptops for you to study computers. Riya sulked and went to the kitchen to make an intercom call to her friend, who lived in another wing of Sapphire Towers. Diya, come down now, I'm bored. Okay. She hung up and announced to her family, I'm going downstairs to the lobby. She got up and left the room, shutting the door behind her, while Sarita called after her. Only half an hour, madam. Riya heard, but didn't reply. Sarita cleared up and excused herself to go to sleep, It was 10 o'clock, and she'd had a long day. Jay joined her in the bedroom and locked the door behind them. Their nightly ritual thus began. Something that they had been doing 5 days a week, every week since they got married. It had been 20 years, and they only missed their activity if she had her periods or they had a party to attend. The latter was so rare because he was quite antisocial. He would rather have sex with her than go to a party. She smiled at him as he came closer and started kissing her. She loved the way he was so into her even after so many years. He dropped her on the bed and lay on top of her. His demanding lips caressed hers roughly. She closed her eyes, waiting for the regular pattern. He would quickly take off her clothes, strip himself, kiss her a bit more, enter, exit, and clean up. Then they would roll over and fall into a soporific slumber. But then he said, "Want to try something new?" It startled her because it had never been asked in all of their married life. She looked at him with wondrous curiosity. New? She nodded. What was wrong with the old? What did he mean? She felt the heady sensation of his lips against her neck, the spot where she got aroused the most. He whispered, "First, let's have a safe word." "Oh, what? A safe word?" she asked between her moans. "What do you mean?" "In case you get uncomfortable." She stayed quiet as he slipped his hand under her shirt and squeezed her breasts. "It'll be surrender. Say surrender when you want me to stop." "Okay." She had no idea where he was coming up with all this. Was it something he had heard about? Or worse, was it something he had already done with someone? Her mind went into a tizzy trying to figure out. But when he grabbed hold of her ass and smacked it hard, her eyes popped out in amazement. Should she enjoy that? She smiled feebly and said, "Yup, that was new." "Did you like it?" he asked, as his lips bent down to cover her mouth hungrily. And surprisingly, she did. She had no idea that the wave of emotions that were going to follow would leave her in a mixture of pleasure and pain over the next few days. This was so unlike Jay. What had gotten into him? Jay suddenly stopped kissing her neck and sat up. He took out a pair of handcuffs from his back pocket and looked at Sarita keenly. Her jaw dropped. "Where did you get those?" He smiled secretly, leaving her more befuddled. He slid off her green kurta and white bra and gently sucked her nipples. She loved every moment of it. This was the foreplay that she had only read about in magazines. It was now actually happening, and she relished the entire idea. He picked her up and threw her gently on the bed as she let out a little giggle of excitement. He held her hands to the back of the bed as he took out a pair of handcuffs from the side table drawer. Her heartbeat throbbed against his chest as he clasped the handcuffs behind her on the bed. Then he took out a handkerchief and blindfolded her. She whispered, "The parents are in the next room." They might be able to save her from this man who didn't seem like her husband. He murmured back, "That's what makes this more fun." Lying there, tied in the darkness, Sarita felt a small wave of fear race through her body. She murmured, "Jay." She didn't know if this was the right thing to do. Had he really tried this with someone else and was experimenting with her to see how she would react to it? She felt reassured by his slow kisses from her neck and down her body, caressing her nipples, her stomach, and her thighs. Suddenly, she felt a shock go through her body that was both intensely cold and deeply hot. Jay had put an ice cube in his mouth and was running his lips around the same spots he had gone a moment earlier. "Hey, Ma!" she squealed, wanting to please his attempt at this new form of lovemaking, but feeling very cold in all the wrong parts. He removed the ice cube and used his fingers to feel the length of her neck and breasts, going down to her navel and circling it, and slowly slipping his fingers into her as she arched her back and felt the wave of pleasure sweep through her body. With his other hand, he held on to her nipples as he clasped them tight while sliding into her. He kept the blindfold on to increase her pleasure, and Sarita realized, by not looking into her husband's eyes, she could imagine this man on top of her to be anyone. She had the first of what would be multiple orgasms. This was nothing like she'd ever had. He soared higher and higher and gave her ass another spank. Yes, this was very different from the missionary position they had been used to. She let out a little yelp, and he covered her mouth with his hand as he continued to make love to her. She was elated. It was all new and bold and terribly exciting. Her body tingled as it split into 1,000 splintering pieces in pleasure. He moved off her, and she was left panting. How would she ever enjoy the old missionary routine again? "Was it good for you?" he asked with a knowing smirk. She could only nod her head. He jumped off the bed, looking extremely pleased and smug, and walked into the bathroom, while Sarita examined her body after this new-found circus act. She didn't know where he had found out about this new way to make love. And suddenly, her mind went spinning. Who was giving him advice? Was he seeing someone else? Just before dozing off to sleep, he murmured, "I could do many more things if you were a little thinner." He gathered a few pillows around him and went off to bed, leaving Sarita with flaming cheeks and a deep sense of guilt for every item of food she had put into her mouth in her 40 years. How amazing and yet cruel could her husband be? With one statement, he could chop a woman's confidence down to smithereens, and with one kiss, he could build it up for a high that lasted a week. That night, Sarita decided on 2 things. She would start going to the gym, and she would start spying on her husband.